Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea from Game Informer, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. We can finally talk about one of the early games from Nintendo in 2024 this week. So that's going to be our main segment. We are going to give our preview of Mario vs. Donkey Kong. And joining me for that is Game Informer's Charles Harte. Charles, how are you doing?
I am doing great. I'm feeling like I got the last mini Mario at the toy store.
Oh, well, I mean, Donkey Kong must be jealous, because if you've seen that opening cutscene, he is pining for some mini Mario toys.
Yeah, if he was like me, that game would not exist. Fortunately, he did not get the last one, so that game exists.
Well, we will get into your early impressions of that game in the main segment, but you know how we do here. We're going to start off with some news. And counter to what you said last week, where you're like, well, every time I'm on, there's always a bunch of news. We don't have a ton of news this week, but we do have some talkers.
Okay.
And the biggest news for Nintendo, I think, out of this week probably didn't come from Nintendo. It came from Universal. And we already knew that Super Nintendo World was planned to open in 2025 at Universal's Epic Universe in Orlando. And we got our first official details this week. So Epic Universe is this huge theme park that Universal is putting together in Orlando, Florida. And it's going to feature 5 worlds based on different brands. I mean, I guess some of them are based on different brands, because basically the way they structured out, I watched this video that they put out, and you enter through this archway known as Kronos, and it's meant to be kind of like this gateway to like the different universes. Like that's what it kind of symbolizes. And the first one you enter is kind of like the hub world. This is the one that's not based on any brand. It's called Celestial Park, and it has shopping and different rides. Like there's like a racing roller coaster, which looks kind of cool. And then there's like this innovative like carousel where it's like there's like multiple things spinning in it. It looks like there's like a lot of like upscale dining as how they're pitching it, and some cool shops. And I mean, if there's anything like the other Universal Studios parks that I've been to, it's just going to be like, here's like a promenade with a few shops and a few restaurants. But it does seem like they're doing some other cool stuff. Like I said, the rides are there. There's a massive hotel that they say is integrated into the park, which seems pretty neat.
Oh.
And so from there, you can go to the other 4 worlds in Epic Universe. So the first one they talked about was How to Train Your Dragon, Isle of Berk. Are you a How to Train Your Dragon guy?
I like the movies. I'm not intensely a fan. My brother is a huge fan, mainly because he's like a score, like a music score nerd.
Okay.
He loves those soundtracks.
Well, you're a bit of a music nerd yourself. We were talking before we got onto this episode that you write song parodies for your lunches before you go on break at Game Informer.
This is true. I should come up with... I gotta watch these movies again and see what they eat. And then I can do a How to Train Your Dragon specific lunch song.
Oh my gosh. Well, it would be lost on me, because I've never seen, outside of like commercials, I haven't seen a second of How to Train Your Dragon. And I think it's just, I was a little bit too old to be like the target demographic when they came out. It's like I'm currently watching this. I mean, maybe this is maybe this is your age group. I'm currently watching the new Disney Plus Percy Jackson and the Olympians series, and I know people in like their early to mid 20s are just bananas over those original movies. Like they think like that's like kind of like how like Spider-Man, like the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies were for me. That is kind of like what they were for them.
With Percy Jackson, it's the books.
Okay.
There are 2 Percy Jackson movies based on the books, but kind of famously, the author Rick Riordan like wrote a letter about how like he gave the rights to it and they paid him and he consulted on it, and then it turned into this thing where it was like not at all what he wanted. So the movies are kind of like taboo. I think I enjoyed them when I was like 11 because I didn't really process what was going on, and now I'm like, oh, that's not like the books at all. So I think that's part of the reason the show is so exciting, is because this has nothing to do with Nintendo. So I really don't need to go off this tangent, I brought it up. But that's why the show is exciting, is it's like a proper adaptation of the source material that people are excited about.
Yeah, from what I've heard, like the show itself has been extremely faithful to the books, which I'm enjoying the show. I think I'm 4 episodes deep in it, and like at first I was like, okay, I just don't get this at all. Like it seems fine, but it's not for me. But now I'm like, the story's picking up, and I told myself I was only going to watch 1 episode last night, and then I was like, I wish I didn't make that promise to myself because I probably want to watch more. I have stuff to do. But yeah, so the way you described it almost reminds me of Harry Potter for my generation.
Yes, it is very much.
So
I read the Harry Potter books and then read the Percy Jackson books. And I think I connected more to Percy Jackson because it was like coming out when I was a kid.
sure.
Yeah.
Whereas Harry Potter was coming out when I was a kid, and of
Yeah.
course I bounced off that as well. So, but anyway, that's a
Speaking
good
of which,
segue because the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, Ministry of Magic is the next world that they talked about. And I guess it's going to be even further beyond the Wizarding World of Harry Potter that they have at the other Universal Studios parks, which I've been to the one in Osaka and the one in Hollywood, or I guess it's just LA. It's Universal City technically, but
mm,
yeah, I mean those are both pretty cool. I've gotten butterbeer at both of those.
what? How is butter? Is it? I've always imagined it just tastes like cream soda, but I
It
don't
is
actually know.
just cream soda. I think they might have some
Okay.
like additional like little tiny flavors in it, but it is very much just cream soda. So don't
Okay.
think that you're missing anything aside from like you get to walk around in Hogwarts with a cream soda.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
basically what it is. But the Ministry of Magic looks pretty cool. They're doing some stuff. Again, I have not read there. I bounced off that first book when I was in middle school or whenever it was that came out. And I'm trying to watch the movies eventually, but just to have some sort of understanding of that cultural phenomenon. But yeah, it looks like they're going further than they did with the other Wizarding Worlds of Harry Potter, and they are going to end up having like things from both the Fantastic Beasts and the original Harry Potter stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of the entire timeline, which I guess is pretty neat.
Yeah. That'll
Um,
be. I don't know any like diehard Fantastic Beasts fans,
yeah, I don't
but
think there are any.
but
I think it's people who were Harry Potter fans and they're just like, I want more in this universe. Okay, I
yeah.
guess this is fine.
If you're out there, this is for you.
The next world is one that actually I was not expecting, called Dark Universe. So you
Yes.
may remember the Dark Universe announcement being one of the great, like, this is going to be a huge cinematic universe, and there's this infamous picture of all these stars, including Tom Cruise and I forget who else is even in it, but
I
like
think
all
Johnny
these.
Depp's there.
Yeah, Johnny Depp. I don't think any of them were in the same room when they took that picture. I think they photoshopped and pieced that picture
Yeah.
together. But that was supposed to be like the next big cinematic universe after Marvel and DC, and then it just the first Mummy movie came out starring Tom Cruise, and it just all fell apart. But they are bringing back the characters from that, so like Frankenstein's monster and Dracula and all these other like infamous monster movie characters that are it's going to be its own world in Epic Universe, which seems very cool. Like I went when I was in Osaka for the Street Fighter 6 cover story for Game Informer. Alex Van Aken and I took a day to go to Universal Studios to check out Super Nintendo World primarily, but we were there for so long that night came around, and this was in October of
Mm.
2022. So all of like the scary stuff started coming out, like because what happens around Halloween at Universal Studios is like the bunch of actors and like different like costumed characters come out for like Halloween stuff. And like I remember walking through like the Jurassic Park area, and it was like all
Ooh.
these like it wasn't even dinosaur stuff. I thought it was going to be dinosaur stuff. It was like ancient Egypt like mythology. It was like, wait, what?
Oh.
But it was very cool to see like these like Egyptian gods walking around and like in like very scary and gory ways. And then like got to the other part, and it was like kind of like zombies. Like, and that made sense because there was a Resident Evil exhibit going on, or not exhibit,
Mm.
but like a experience that you could go into. But yeah, Dark Universe, they have a lot of potential that they could do some really cool stuff there. And then there's the reason that we're talking about this in the first place, because Super Nintendo World, complete with the Donkey Kong Country area, is the final world in this. And I have talked about the experience of going to both the Osaka one and the one in LA, and it's just magical. And I hope that this one's closer to the Osaka one than it is the LA one, because the LA one is it's such little land and space that they
Mm.
have that it just feels too compact. It's missing the Yoshi ride. It's not multi-tiered the way that the one in Osaka is. So I'm hoping that because Florida has a lot more space to build on, and
Mhm.
they're building it as a whole new park, I'm hoping that they budgeted the space properly. That they're one, they have enough space to deliver the experience that Osaka is able to deliver. But two, I'm hoping that they've budgeted space to expand eventually. Because if we're getting the Mario and Donkey Kong areas, I'm really hopeful that there's going to be a Legend of Zelda area. Like we talked about this recently about how Eiji Aonuma was spotted alongside Shigeru Miyamoto in Orlando at the construction site for Super Nintendo World. So it would stand to reason that maybe Zelda would be next, or maybe just Eiji Aonuma wanted to go to a construction site and watch a theme park be built. But it
Yeah.
would be very cool to see them like start with what we already have at other destinations and then slowly expand into like Zelda, or I don't even know, like even like something cool like Nintendo cannot for the life of them figure out what to do with Star Fox. A Star Fox ride would
Yes,
rule. Like that would be
absolutely.
so cool. But I mean, is Zelda the next logical step for you for Super Nintendo World if they do end up having room to expand at this location?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, I hope they have room to expand in general because I just think there's so much there that for them to not like capitalize on as much of the IP as possible, I think would be a shame. I think Zelda's definitely my next choice. I feel like I could see like a Splatoon area being kind of cool.
That would be
Um,
cool.
Not even that I think we talked about it last time. I haven't like played a ton of Splatoon, but I think the aesthetic would be really cool and like a space to exist in. I could also see like, you know, like an Animal Crossing like mart section. Really what I want, here's what I want from a Nintendo World is I want like an Epcot, but it's all Nintendo zones.
Oh,
So you
that
have
would
like
be
a
cool.
big circle and you can go around and do all the different like this is Donkey Kong, this is, you know, Zelda, whatever. I mean, I want those to get like proper full spaces, but I think that would rock.
So rank those worlds in terms of how excited you would be to visit them, because Universal in this video they were like, well, we hope people will come and just spend an entire week at Epic Universe because they can just do one world per day. And I'm just like,
Mhm.
I don't know if like all like I've gone, like I said, I've gone to the other Universal Studios and I spent a full day the first time I went to Super Nintendo World in Osaka. I spent an entire day there. Like it was barely enough time for other stuff. Like I
Yeah.
think I was there from like 2 p.m. until like 8 p.m., 9 p.m. Like the sun was, it went from being very very strong and burning us both to being completely gone in nighttime. And you know, that was magical. But like Wizarding World of Harry Potter, I went there for like maybe an hour and I was like, I think I'm good. But of course,
Mhm.
again, I'm not the target demographic for that. But they think people are going to go here for an entire week. That's the hope. I mean, maybe they'll pull something off because they're able to build with intention from the very beginning. It's not just add-ons to their existing parks.
Right.
But rank these 1 to 5. So it's Celestial Park, How to Train Your Dragon, Dark Universe, Harry Potter, and Nintendo World.
Um, Number five, I'm probably gonna say Dark Universe, just because I'm not really a horror guy. I think it's
Wow.
cool. I just think it's not specifically for me. Then I'm gonna say How to Train Your Dragon because I like that, but I haven't seen him in a while. Then probably Harry Potter, mainly because I am kind of interested in what Celestial Park is. I'm gonna put that at number two because I feel like I'm curious to see what that looks like when you can just be creative and be like, "Welcome to our magical world." Like I don't know. I feel like I'm thinking like how iconic Magic Kingdom is at Disney, and how like that stands on its own. I want to see what Celestial Park does. And then I mean, number one, can you imagine I said something else on the podcast? So Super Nintendo World.
I mean, you can say whatever you want on this podcast. You could say Super
No,
Nintendo World is your least exciting, but I think that
definitely not.
from
I've
my
never been
experience, it
too,
it
so
is the one that deserves the number one spot. I mean, who knows? Maybe How to Train Your Dragon Isle of Berk is going to be amazing and blow my socks off, even though I've never really paid attention to that franchise. But they could probably do some really cool stuff. I've heard great things about it. But yeah, Celestial Park is the wild card here, right?
yeah, and I'm kind of interested in the fact that it's a wild card. Um,
But they even got
yeah,
Steven Spielberg to come on the trailer and talk about the park and like how it's like so immersive and everything, which is interesting because you know, I guess they were like, hey, like we know you're doing an interview or we're shooting something for you for this other movie that you're working on. How about you just talk about this theme park? It's probably the
Yeah.
equivalent of like, yeah, we have this interview with this legend. It's like when I have interviews with like AG Aonuma, and it's like, yeah, we're talking about Tears of the Kingdom, and then like I throw in a few Ocarina of Time questions as well, because of
Yeah.
course, I think that's probably what they did with him. It probably wasn't like, hey, come shoot this new thing for us, talking about this theme park. It was probably talking about something else, and they're like, oh yeah, by the way, can you do a quick promo for our theme park?
Yeah. Yeah.
But we don't know when exactly it's opening, but it's set for sometime in 2025. And I think that for me, it probably goes Super Nintendo World 1, Dark Universe 2, Celestial Park 3, How to Train Your Dragon 4, and then Harry Potter 5.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Just because I've done the Harry Potter thing before, and even as not a fan, it was neat enough. But like they would have to do something really different and really like beyond what they did for me to be like, oh, I'm so excited to go to that. But that is, I think, probably the biggest news in Nintendo's orbit for this week anyway. But the hope is that we're going to get a Nintendo Direct pretty soon. Like, a lot of people are speculating February. There's a rumor even going around that it's going to be next week, which would be nice because we don't have like a big release to talk about next week. So that would be nice to be able to be like, oh, that sorts that episode. But we're still in a holding pattern for that first Nintendo Direct of 2024, but we did get a PlayStation State of Play earlier this week. And during that stream, we mostly saw just, PlayStation games, as you'd imagine, but there were a couple of announcements of games coming to Switch. The first one is one that's been on Switch. It was Dave the Diver, and this was the announcement was like, oh, it's coming to PlayStation, so that doesn't really concern us. And it wasn't explicitly stated that this extra little tidbit that they threw on the end of this announcement is coming to other platforms, but it's presumed, I think. It's Godzilla DLC for Dave the Diver. And basically it just shows Godzilla emerging from the water, and we don't really see much else, but it looks really cool. Godzilla's like having a moment right now.
He really is. Good for him.
Have you seen Godzilla -1 or -0 or whatever it's what is it called?
I think it's -1.
-1? Okay. I always want to say -0, but I don't think that makes sense.
I haven't seen it. I haven't seen any Godzilla movies before. Not that I'm not interested. It's just never been a thing. I need to go. I haven't been to the theater in a while. Is the other thing. There's like 4 or 5 movies I've been meaning to see. But yeah, I've heard universal acclaim for that.
I've heard people that are like, I don't even like kaiju movies, and I love this movie. That's like one of the best movies I've seen in years. And I'm so bummed I've not had a chance to get to the theater, because everybody says that like, oh, this is one you need to see in theaters. Kind of like the first Avatar movie where everybody was like, yeah, it's fine, but if you see it in theaters, it's amazing. This one, people are like singing the praises of it and saying that you need to see it in theaters. So while I have a pretty good like home like entertainment system, I really need to go see that. But this Godzilla DLC comes to Dave the Diver in May, and I think that's going to be just in time for kind of the Godzilla fervor to die down a little bit. But isn't there like another Godzilla movie coming out in like very short order, like Godzilla and Kong?
Oh, Godzilla versus Kong, maybe?
I don't think it's Godzilla versus. I think they're teaming up this time. I think the last one was Godzilla versus Kong, and now it's like Godzilla and Kong.
It's Godzilla X Kong, the New Empire.
Oh boy! So Godzilla Cross Kong, I think is how it's pronounced.
It comes out on my birthday, March 29th.
Okay, so it's going to sustain the Godzilla hype, given that it's good, on into May, because that'll be probably right around the time that's leaving theaters, and then you'll be able to play the Godzilla DLC in Dave the Diver in May, presumably coming to Switch. We don't know yet, but I'm imagining it is, because why would they make all this DLC and only have it be exclusive to PlayStation? But so looking forward to that, because I love Dave the Diver. But speaking of things cross other things, Sonic Generations came out in 2011. Did you end up playing this game?
Oh yeah, this is my. I haven't played a ton of Sonic games, but this is like one of my favorites. I think this is probably the best Sonic game I've played. I think I usually say my favorite is Sonic and the Black Knight, just because it's funny. But yeah, I have very fond memories of this game. It's also the way I like know the song "Escape the City," because it's like a highlight reel of all like these best Sonic levels throughout the years. So I feel like me playing that game has allowed me to stay in the Sonic conversation. So yes, I'm very excited.
I'm very excited because this was one of my favorites from that era as well. And it was originally released to celebrate the 25th anniversary. We are coming up on the 35th anniversary now.
Ooh.
And yeah, I'm feeling very old. But the state of play, I mean, they've been slowly putting out these kind of remasters on modern platforms. They did Sonic Colors a few years ago. They did Sonic Origins, which was the compilation of the Genesis games, and Sonic CD a couple years ago. And the state of play showed Sonic Generations footage, and this was leaked, so a lot of people that were in the know with the Sonic community knew what was coming. But in the middle of a cutscene, classic and modern Sonic, who are the main characters or the only playable characters in the original Sonic Generations, are intercepted by none other than Shadow the Hedgehog.
What?
And it's called Sonic Cross Shadow Generations. And it's a full remaster. So you have 2D Sonic, which does or classic Sonic, who does the 2D gameplay style, modern Sonic does the 3D gameplay style. And for people who aren't aware, what it does was it was celebrating the 20th anniversary of Sonic, and in doing so, it took classic levels from a different Sonic game. So like you played Green Hill Zone from Sonic 1 and Chemical Plant Zone from Sonic 2 and Sky Sanctuary from Sonic and Knuckles. I'm trying to go through from memory here what levels were in it. And all the way up until the most recent Sonic games, and it remade those levels in modern visuals. And what you do is there's 2 acts for each zone, and so like Green Hill Zone, the first one you play is as 2D classic Sonic, and it's in modern graphics and modern physics and everything. And then the next act is as modern Sonic, and you play Green Hill Zone in 3D, which was very cool. I like that idea a lot. And you go all the way up, and you're up until modern games. I think the most recent one at that point was Sonic Unleashed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there was a Sonic Unleashed level as well, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe they skipped that one, but I know there was a Sonic 06 level, because I was like, this game was really good until this point, because even with like the hindsight and like the lessons they learned from that, the Sonic 06 level still was bad. So yeah, this one brings all that forward. I don't know if it's going to be 60 frames per second on Switch. I know if you play the Xbox 360 version on Xbox Series X, it gets 60 frames per second already. So if you go and I own it digitally, and if I play that on my Xbox Series X, I get 60 frames per second. It is a much better experience if you play that on a Series X. That's a pro tip right there. But this version apparently is going to have a lot of modern like frame rate and everything, so that's something to look forward to. But the thing you can't get on the Xbox Series X version is the Xbox 360 version playing on Xbox Series X. Shadow is a new playable character in this version, so that is going to have new content, so new levels, boss fights, presumably story content. In the trailer, we saw Space Colony Arc, which was from Sonic Adventure 2. We saw the Doomseye alien from Shadow the Hedgehog, which did not think they were going to acknowledge that. But then again, they acknowledged Sonic 06 in the original. And then the Bio Lizard looks like a boss battle from Sonic Adventure 2, which is good stuff. And it's coming to Switch and pretty much every other console. So Xbox Series X, Xbox One, PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, PC, and Switch in fall 2024. So very much looking forward to that. Are you going to revisit this?
Absolutely. I'm honestly, it's a game I didn't ever think they would go back to, just because it's already like a remaster of things. But I guess Sonic's reputation the last few years has been reviving the same few games over and over again. I did look it up, by the way. Sonic Generations gets up to Sonic Colors.
Okay.
So there's a Planet Wisp in that game.
Which that made sense at that point, because Sonic Colors was a Wii exclusive at that point. I mean, up until just a few years ago, it was stuck on the Wii.
Yeah. So
that was a smart move to bring a little bit of that and be like, hey, there's probably this game that you may not have played if you don't. I mean, because this didn't come. Did Sonic Generations come to Wii?
I don't think so.
I don't think it did.
I have the Wikipedia up here, and it does not say Wii. There was like
3DS.
a 3DS version, yeah, but
that was very different. I think it was all different levels too. I wish they would put those out. Like, I wish that all of the I wish this was like a kind of master compilation, because there was also like, I think it was PC exclusive DLC for, because
Oh,
they went from Sonic 1 to Sonic 2 and then to Sonic and Knuckles, but they skipped Sonic 3, which was an interesting move because a lot of people consider that the best entry.
uh-huh.
And there were theories that like it was because of like the soundtrack and everything, and like
Mm,
they couldn't even like use the music or anything, but they did put Casino Night, if I'm not mistaken, from Sonic 3 in the Steam version, and it was like an exclusive DLC that you could buy.
gotcha.
So I've never played that version. I do own Sonic Generations on Steam, and I tried to play it on my Steam Deck, and it was like, you need to install this, and I'm like, well, I'm not doing that.
I
Play it on
also,
Xbox.
yeah, I think I also have it on Steam because I was like, maybe I'll come back to this, and then didn't feel like fighting the Steam Deck to make it work.
Yeah, that's the only one that has like given me problems trying to run something on my Steam Deck so far.
Hmm.
But on top of that, we also got an announcement that to celebrate Shadow coming to Sonic, or Sonic Cross Shadow Generation. I always want to say Shadow Cross Sonic Generations because Sonic
Mm,
Generations makes sense.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
Sonic Cross Shadow Generations, to celebrate that announcement, Sega is putting Shadow in Sonic Superstars as a free DLC costume. So that's fun.
That's very cool.
I did ask Sonic Team creative officer Takashi Izuka about why Shadow is not in Sonic Generations. And I'm bringing up the quote right here. This was back in July of 2023, so this is outdated at this point. But he said, quote, Shadow is from the modern series of characters and gameplay that we have introduced. The classic series exists before the modern series, so they haven't met at that time. There's no relationship, so we won't be bringing Shadow into the classic series.
Interesting.
Unfortunately, Shadow was in a capsule at that time. So I think that this is a smart way to circumvent that, though, because it's just like, oh yeah, it's just like an optional DLC skin that you can throw on
Yeah.
Sonic if you want. But that's interesting. I'm they haven't released any looks at that, but I'm curious to see how he looks in the Sonic Superstars style.
Yeah.
But did you ever check out Sonic Superstars? I forget if I asked you.
I did. I think it cemented my stance that the 2D Sonic games are not for me. Not that I think they're bad. I just think I've never understood how I'm supposed to play them. And my introduction was the 3D games. So those have always made more sense to me.
Yeah, that
But,
makes sense
yeah.
for people younger than myself, people who were not around in the 90s. That
Yeah.
makes sense. I would recommend, if you do really want to put the 2D Sonic being for you or not to the test, go check out either Sonic Mania or Sonic Origins and play Sonic 3 and Knuckles from start to finish.
Sure.
I mean,
I
those are
think
both pretty quick plays as well. So like those are the two best ones that I would say like to check out. If you Sonic Superstars was very hit or miss for me.
sure. I think when I played Sonic Generations, I think I played it with my neighbor who would come over, and he played all the 2D parts and I played all the 3D parts.
Well, the other thing about like the 2D Sonic games is in like all of the titles that do kind of like, hey, it's modern Sonic game, but there's 2D sequences. The 2D platforming is not as good or as tight as it was
Yeah.
in like the dedicated 2D games. Like when you play Sonic Mania, it feels so much better than when you do the 2D sequences in like Sonic Forces, because that came out like months apart from each other.
Yeah.
And it's like whenever the camera turned to the side, I was like, wow, this feels so much worse than it did in a game that I played just like 2 months ago in Sonic Mania. So like it was really a stark contrast in that. But yeah, those are the ones I would recommend checking out if you do want to really put like, are 2D Sonic games for me to the test.
Yeah.
Mania or Sonic 3 and Knuckles. But you know, speaking of remakes, which I would argue Sonic Generations kind of is, it's like a remake compilation. We're finally in the month, Charles, of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
Oh.
My most anticipated game of 2024 so far, but that's not coming to a Nintendo console. And what also is not coming to a Nintendo console is apparently a remake of Final Fantasy VI, because there was an interview, you know, Yoshinori Kitase, who is, you know, this legend who's been with Final Fantasy since the think late 80s, early 90s. And Naoki Hamaguchi, who is the director of the Final Fantasy VII Remake series, they've been doing the media rounds. I met with them recently, and in addition to the cover story a few months ago, I actually got to meet with them again a couple weeks ago and say hello. And they were doing an interview with a French YouTuber named Julien Chiese, and Julian asked them about is there going to be a remake of Final Fantasy VI, and Kitase said that it would be an even bigger project than Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Mm-hmm.
And he's sad that he can't say it's going to happen. Like, he wishes he could answer in the affirmative, but he's bummed out that he can't. Do you think that 6 is the Final Fantasy that most needs the remake treatment after the 7 remake?
That's a good question. I feel like from what I understand about 6 versus 7, like 7's kind of rough to look at now. Like the original 7.
Yeah.
I feel like part of the beauty of the remakes is that it kind of revitalizes it into like a more palatable form. And I think 6 is like art style at the very least has stood up pretty well. I think also there's so many Final Fantasy games that not doing that one doesn't break my heart, but I know it is a lot of people's favorite. But yeah, I would say like 8 or 9 probably. I don't know.
A lot of people are saying 9 as their pick. When I met with them recently, I told them about how, because when I wrote the cover story, we got into the making of Final Fantasy VII Remake. And the story behind it was, Yoshinori Kitase was on the U.S. media tour back in 2009 for Final Fantasy 13. And all of the U.S. media kept saying, hey, are you going to do a remake of Final Fantasy VII? Are you going to do a remake of Final Fantasy VII? And then when he came back, he went and talked to Tetsuya Nomura, also at Square Enix, the creator of Kingdom Hearts. He's worked on so many other Final Fantasy games. And Tetsuya Nomura also had that idea that he wanted to do a Final Fantasy VII remake, so they started the ball rolling in that regard. But he's like, that Kitase was like, that's where kind of like the idea came from my perspective, was all these US media people kept asking me while I was on this tour for Final Fantasy 13 if we were going to do a remake of 7. And I ended my recent interview with them. I was like, hey, I really appreciate you telling me that story about how like US media people kept asking you about Final Fantasy VII remake, and that's ultimately what put the idea in your head. So with that in mind, when are you doing a Final Fantasy X remake? And he just kind of laughed. He didn't give me any answer whatsoever, but that was how I ended my interview.
I did edit your the rapid fire, which listeners you can go find on YouTube. Rapid fire with the director of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth,
Yamaguchi.
Yeah, and you, the number of Final Fantasy X questions, I was like, this is very funny. Also, I know that you like it because you've tweeted about it a lot, but I was like, I know he wants this.
Oh yeah, I asked Hamaguchi-san about 10-3 in that rapid fire, and he was just like, I'd like that.
Yeah.
What can he say? He's not the one who's making this decision, but like, I asked him about like, would a Final Fantasy mainline game ever come to a Nintendo console again? So yeah, go check that out. I mean, it's meant to be mostly humorous, but I think that was a fun interview. I always love doing those rapid fire interviews. I haven't really plugged that on this show, so I appreciate you bringing that up.
Oh yes.
So are you a big Final Fantasy guy?
I am not, but it's not for lack of trying. I think they're just so big, and I feel like I'm always so intimidated by the series. But for some reason, I'm always very interested in like people's rankings of things like this. Like I've never seen a Fast and Furious movie, but I'm really obsessed with like people's rankings of those movies because I think the titles are so funny. We mentioned that I do parody lunch songs every day. At my old job, I did my first like 12 or 13 days. It was all titles of Fast and Furious movies, but my first and last name. So it was Charles Harte, Charles Harte, Tokyo Drift. Anyways, it's Final Fantasy. When 16 came out, I gave it like a good try. I don't think there's enough in that game that didn't really click with me, but I tweeted out and asked people their top 5 Final Fantasy games. And that was like really interesting to see. Like, I had no idea so many people cared about Final Fantasy 9.
Oh yeah.
Right. I was expecting like 6 and 7 and 10. And it was always funny to see like, oh, this person said 15. hardly anyone's favorite is 15. What's that about? And that was fun. So
I think 15 is underrated, to be honest. Like, I
yeah,
really liked 15. I think the story, there's parts where it's very, very rushed, and it's evident that Square Enix at one point was just like going to Hajime Tabata, who was the director of that one, and being like, "Hey, we got to get this thing out the door," because like there are parts where it's like, "Oh, we just completely forgot about this character," and like
yeah,
this, there's like weird like gaps and like jumps ahead in the story. And but yeah, overall I really like Final Fantasy 15.
yeah. I've played the games. I've never finished a Final Fantasy game. I've gotten to like 20 hours in every time I start it. I've played 7 remake 20 hours, 15 probably like 10 hours, and then 16 was just like 20 hours.
You've got to just finish 7 remake, because I feel like you're super close to finishing it. If you're 20 hours deep, you probably only have like another like 10 hours.
I probably was. I think it just, I don't know. I could give it another try. I just got bored with it. I think I could feel, as someone who hadn't played the original, that it felt like they were putting a lot of stuff in to stretch the story out, and the fact that it felt like I kept doing stuff and it wasn't really going anywhere was like kind of frustrating to me.
Mhm.
But I don't know. It also, not that I think I'm going to do it, but I wish I had played the original before I went and played that, because I think it would give me a greater appreciation for it.
Sure. I think that 7 remake is fantastic, and I'm so excited for Rebirth later this month. But the downside is that there are no mainline Final Fantasy games on Switch past 12. And I'm pretty sure that
Oh,
the 13 trilogy could run just fine on Switch. I don't know why
yeah.
those haven't made it over. They also aren't on PlayStation. They're backward compatible on Xbox, but it's just very weird that 13 has kind of been. They did 3 games of it, but they just kind of have like pushed it by the wayside. There's also the mobile version of Final Fantasy 15. It's called Pocket Edition, is
Oh
on
yeah.
Switch, which is very, very strange. It's like kind of like chibi art style instead of like the more like photorealism look of 15.
Yeah.
Again, I love 15, but I tried playing the Pocket Edition. I was like, this just feels silly.
Yeah. To like earnestly get into it through that version is would be fascinating to me.
Yeah, I'd say that if you do want to check it, like if you're bummed about this news that Kitase cannot answer in the affirmative that there's going to be a Final Fantasy VI remake, the Pixel Remaster series is on Switch, and while that's more of I mean, it's in the name, it's a remaster. It does bring Final Fantasy VI, which a lot of people consider the greatest turn-based RPG of all time, forward into a modern platform with like kind of sharper visuals. And there are people who have problems with it. Like some people really dislike the font of Final Fantasy VI Pixel Remaster.
Oh yeah.
And some like, but like it's better than like whatever the art style we got. I want to say it was like the Steam re-release like 8 or 10 years ago or something. Like it was like way too like, I don't know. There was a lot of controversy around that version, but I think this is like the more well liked one, and it's on Switch, so you can go check that out. The Pixel Remaster is 1 through 6. There's also the Final Fantasy VII remaster that is on, I think 7, 8, and 7, 8, 9, 10, 10, 2 are all remastered on Switch, and then 12 has the Zodiac Age, which is kind of like the updated remaster where like they reworked like the job system and everything. I've heard it's actually a substantial improvement over the original 12, and a lot of people consider it the best way to play that. So
Hmm.
you can more than get your Final Fantasy fill if you're new to the series through Switch, but if you're wanting anything new, unfortunately, I think you're out of luck. So that is that's the Final Fantasy hour that we just covered there. We'll end on this as far as the news is concerned, and it's another game that is not on Switch, but we're going to talk about it because the actual game is on Switch. You played Celeste, right?
I did. I think I know what you're going to talk about, but yeah, I played Celeste. That came out. That was, I think, the spring of my senior year. So I
Okay.
played it on my Switch in study hall.
Yeah, it's a very good 2D platformer. It came out in 2018, and it handles a lot of really good like narrative themes. One being like mental health and anxiety, and I really appreciate that. And they're celebrating the 6th anniversary. The developer Maddie Makes Games, and they did it by making an N64 style game, and apparently development only lasted a week.
Yeah. Have you played it?
No, it's called Celeste 64 Fragments of the Mountain.
Well,
And
I have played it, so
you
you're in
have.
luck.
Whoa. Well, I was about to run down what it is, but it's just an homage to those early kind of 3D platformers, as the name would indicate. But talk to me about it. I did not play it yet.
Yeah, I mean it's really fun. I haven't played that much of it. I think I thought maybe I'd be able to talk about it on the GI show, so I played it maybe like 20 minutes while I was waiting for everyone to get ready. But yeah, it's just this little like 3D platformer. I mean, it really has the N64 vibe, and it's kind of like, I don't know, like a world in Mario 64 where you can just kind of explore around and find. They have strawberries instead of like power stars.
Yeah.
Um, and the music, I don't know who did it. I know Lena Raine did it in like the proper game. I don't know if she came back for this one, but the music is like really in that style. And whenever you get a strawberry, it does like a and it like does a freeze frame and stuff, and that's really fun.
Hmm.
Um, and then there's also little cassette tapes hidden around, which if you played Celeste, you know that there's B-sides in there that you can find, and they unlock like harder versions of the levels. You find the cassette tapes in this, then you get like these mini like challenge worlds. And it's hard, and that's fitting because that's Celeste.
Yeah. I so I didn't play it, but I did turn on a Let's Play on YouTube, and it looks like to 100% it's less than 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like it's a good time, and it looks like Celeste, but polygonal 3D instead of the kind of sprite based 2D that we got with the original game. And like you said, it seems like a really fun time. Seems like it's kind of like an homage to those N64 style collectathons. Maybe not as far as like Banjo Kazooie or Donkey Kong 64, but maybe more in line with like the Mario 64 style collectathon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's, I don't know, it's an excuse to kind of revisit Celeste Mountain in a new format. And they did that a few years ago as well, where they remade certain parts of Celeste in like the in-game video game that exists in Celeste,
Yeah, the
where it was like
Pico 8.
yeah, it was like an 8-bit version that was pretty neat. But if you want to play Celeste 64 Fragments of the Mountain, you can visit itch.io and download the game for free for PC and Linux. So is there anything else we need to know about this before we take our first break?
No, just know it's great, and it's very there's a lot of like funny, cute things that are hidden around that I won't spoil, but it's worth exploring.
And if you haven't played the original Celeste, definitely check that out. That is on Switch.
Yes,
That
definitely.
is one of the better 2D platformers to come out of the last 10 years, and well worth your time. And you'll probably want to throw your controller at certain points, but you'll also be very, very excited when you finally beat those challenges. So check out Celeste if you haven't already. Charles, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to be talking all about Mario versus Donkey Kong. We will be right back. We have already chatted about Another Code Recollection, which was the first Nintendo published game of 2024. But the game we're talking about today feels like the actual first Nintendo game of 2024. That game is Mario vs. Donkey Kong. It is a remake of the 2004 Game Boy Advance game. And Charles, you've been playing it. So for those unfamiliar, talk to me about the concept here.
Yeah, so this is something I learned while doing this preview because I didn't actually really understand the legacy of this game. So it's basically a continuation of that kind of idea and rivalry from the 1981 Donkey Kong arcade cabinet, which is, you know, Mario, then known as Jumpman, facing off against Donkey Kong. There was a continuation on the Game Boy, the original Game Boy, which was Donkey Kong. They added a bunch of levels that you could play as Mario.
A lot of people consider that Donkey Kong 94, a lot of people call it, it is one of the better remakes in gaming history.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was
And then
fantastic.
this is like a proper, like it gets its own franchise continuation of that kind of gameplay ideal where you are playing as Mario, you're chasing down Donkey Kong, and it's like these short little puzzle platforming levels, and it's delightful.
Yeah, so we can talk about the early portions of this game. You've been playing it for review, but this is the preview embargo that we're able to cover here. So things that it adds new cooperative play, obviously new graphics, but also new music. So what are your early impressions of Mario versus Donkey Kong?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot more to it than I anticipated. I think just looking at stills, I kind of assumed it was just you kind of pilot Mario around and solve puzzles, but I didn't understand. Once now that I'm actually playing it, I really feel like I appreciate the depth of this puzzle design, and it has like a very uniquely Nintendo thing of even when the puzzle's not like difficult, it's still like super fun to solve,
Hmm.
and it keeps me fully engaged as I'm doing it. And I really appreciate that. The main thing that surprised me is there's a lot of jumps. Like Mario can jump, but in this game he's got. I think I just thought it would be, normal standard jump, but you can go, you can do a handstand, and you can do a triple jump off of that. And then he's got like his classic backflip jumps, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
ways you can get like creative with solving the levels if you just use different jumps in different places.
Yeah, so I've actually played through the first world as well, so I can give my impressions. I've never played the original. I only played Tipping Stars, which was the Wii U and 3DS version,
Mm.
and I remember that was unique because it had like cross save and I think cross buy, which was
Whoa.
very very
Yeah.
that was revolutionary for Nintendo. I think everybody else had already been doing that for like the past like 7 or 8 years with like PlayStation and Vita, but that was groundbreaking for Nintendo back in like 2015, or yeah, I guess 2015 is when that game came out, I think. Um, but that's a very different one because like I think that the Tipping Stars, what it does is it was just like you would lay out the path and then you would tell the mini Mario toy to walk automatically on the path, and you had to make sure that the path was designed in such a way that it would collect the stuff and then like collect the collectibles and then get to the goal. Whereas this one, you are in direct control of Mario. You're able to run
Yeah.
around directly controlling him, and you can just make it through these puzzles. You can step on switches to change over like the different colors of like the barriers and the platforms and ladders and switches and everything. So there's that. There's also like enemies you have to either take out or jump on top of or avoid.
You can throw them.
You can throw them at each other, which is always satisfying to clear out the path. There's the hammer, which a lot of people probably know from Super Smash Brothers. It plays the
Yeah.
little song, but it is here from the original Donkey Kong game. That was where the hammer actually has its origins, and so they carried that forward into this. That's very helpful, and I like that you can kind of combo it together by like doing the hammer, taking out the enemies, and then tossing it up in the air, and because you can't jump with the hammer, so then you can jump up and grab it out of the midair and continue hammering, which can come in handy. And yeah, I'm also having a really good time with it so far. And it is a nice throwback. It's not quite like, oh well, this is just like the original Donkey Kong, but there are definitely elements uh, carried over from it.
Yeah, I think it I can feel the DNA of that, like that type of interaction, that gameplay style in here a lot. Yeah, another new thing that it has is this casual mode. I don't know if you've messed around with that at all,
No,
Brian.
I haven't.
I actually really really like it. So what it basically does is uh, it gets rid of a few barriers that make the game a little bit harder, and I think in some cases can be frustrating, especially when it gets to like harder levels. But what it does is it gets rid of the timer, so now you don't have to worry about time at all.
Okay.
Um, and it adds a few checkpoints around the levels and like little checkpoint flags. So basically, it means that uh, if you are playing the level, it kind of eliminates the challenge of the platforming element. So if it's like a difficult puzzle to solve because you're having a hard time jumping at the right time or something, um, that's not going to be as much of a barrier for you. But the puzzle stays the same. So it's never making the puzzle easier. It's just giving a little bit of leniency when you mess up sometimes.
Hmm.
And I think that's like a really smart solution to like modernizing it or making it more friendly to like a kid that might get frustrated easily. Um, and I know I definitely had times where I was like, I'm just gonna turn on casual mode because I keep dying on this same shy guy for no reason, and it'll just make my life easier. Um, and yeah, I really I wish there was a way to take this kind of creative solution for like difficulty and accessibility and put it into other games.
Yeah, and
And
I think that what it does so well is just kind of like it has you assessing the entire situation of the level. Like again, I'm very early
yeah.
on, but it's like you're looking at it and you're like, all right, well, if I hit this switch, that's going to open up this path. But then how do I get over to that path if this path is blocked off? And it does that so well. And there are some very funny animations as well. I was thinking about like for some reason the animation of Mario being on like one of like the poles where you like the horizontal poles where you
Mhm.
grab onto it and just kind of hang, but then you can start swinging, and it looks very normal at first, like just like kind of like a normal video game like protagonist swinging on a pole, but then he gets going so fast it just looks ridiculous.
Yeah.
um but yeah, I'm having a good time with it so far, and it sounds like you are as well.
Yeah, yeah. I am. I went from being like, oh, this will be a fun thing to do this week at work, and now I think this is like one of. I anticipate this will be in like my top 10 this year. Like I'm having a very good time with
Oh
it.
wow! So it's funny because you had mentioned to the Game Informer staff, you're like, I thought this was just like one of those weird games that people liked for some reason, but now I get it. So what was like the
Yeah.
the the light bulb that went off in your head that like clicked for you, and like what did you think of like when you met like a weird game that people liked for some reason?
Um, I mean, I think you're making me sound nicer than I was. I think I said it was a weird old game people
Oh,
liked
that's
for
right.
some reason.
Yes, weird old
Um,
game, 20 years ago.
I mean, I think there are some games. Um, I mean, I can take the original Super Mario Bros. As an example of at the time revolutionary. Now it there's a bunch of games that do what it did better because they can look at what it did and kind of like iterate on it, and like no one would recommend the original Super Mario Bros. To someone now over like a modern Mario game. Um, and there's like some like frictions in old games like that where I know if you were around at that time or if you're just used to playing games like that, I think that it's easier to get along with. And I think I assumed this game would feel older than it did, but there's a lot of ways that it like I think just the puzzle design of um, the fact that you can be creative with it, like it's not tying you down of like you just have to do this one task and it's boring over and over again, or it's weirdly hard for no reason. um, it's the fact that I'm having fun with every puzzle and also putting these jumping mechanics in like give me a little bit more control or agency. Like I know they did it on purpose, but it kind of feels like a I think is an interview you did with some of the Zelda guys with like Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild. Just the idea that like it feels good when it feels like you're breaking the game. Like that
Hmm.
feels fun, and they know that. So the fact that they introduced the triple jump really early, and then later levels, I can be like, oh, I don't have to climb on any of these ropes in this jungle level. I can just triple jump over all this space. And that they leave that in like makes me feel really cool. One of the first things I did after I finished the first few levels, I looked up speed runs of the original games because I was like, were these jumps really always in there? And they were. And the speed runs are very fun.
Oh man, I'll have to check that out because I don't know, some speedruns just annoy me because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you have to some of the Ocarina of Time speedruns just drive me insane because they're like backwards jumping through like a very specific pixel, and then suddenly they're warped to Ganon's castle, and I'm just like, oh my god, like this just it doesn't feel like they're actually speed running the game. It
Yeah.
just feels like they're breaking the game, which that's a different skill all in of itself. But with like ones that are just like skillful uses of the tools that the developers intentionally provide you, and you're just breaking the game through just being a master of those tools.
Yes.
Those are the ones that appeal to me the most, and those can be the most fun to watch, like watching like a Mario World speed run where somebody's just insanely good, or even like a Sonic speed run
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
it's not really like they're not breaking the game in like a technical sense. They're breaking the game just from being so good at it. And those are the ones that I'm excited for. So I'll have to go check those out because that sounds extremely fun, especially with that triple jump that you're talking about, because I was doing some fun stuff with it even early on in my playthrough.
Yeah. And I'm really curious to see like when this game comes out, how those speed runs like compare to the new game. Like if there's stuff you used to be able to do that you can't now, or if like some new ability has been unlocked. I think that'll be really fun.
Yeah, for sure. So there are, from what I'm reading on the eShop, more than 130 levels, and they are pretty quick hit levels for the most
Mhm.
part. So, yeah, there's a lot of content there, including 2 all new worlds in this Switch version. So it's not just like a straight remake with like all the same stuff that if you played the Game Boy Advance version you've played before. It looks like there's 2 completely new worlds full of levels for you to play through.
Yeah, and they're not one thing I didn't even realize until I saw which worlds were the new one. They're not just tacked on at the end; they're distributed throughout. So World 4, which is I think the last world I can talk about, that's one of the new worlds.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and they just squeeze it in between what used to be 3 and 4. So yeah, it'll feel like the arc of completing the levels will feel the same, but they've kind of elongated it, which is cool.
That's smart because that means they're not just making like really hard levels and putting them at the end,
Yeah,
or they're not just putting like, oh, we made these levels and they're just like bonus worlds at the end, and you're like, oh, I just did these really hard levels, and now it's like kind of like going back down to like a mid-level
yeah, and
world or
it's and
mid
it's
game world.
it's done so well that I didn't even know they were new, which
Oh,
is
that's
nice.
great. So this comes to Switch on February 16th, and if anybody listening to this wants to check it out right now, there's actually a demo on the eShop that just hit this week. We could have included that in the news segment, but we decided to put it here. And Charles, I'll probably have you back on in a couple of weeks to deliver your final review once you are able to. So thanks for running this down. Is there anything else we need to know about Mario vs. Donkey Kong before we wrap this segment up?
I don't think so. It's I guess the thing I would say is, one, there's a lot more to this game than I realized. Like you said, 130 levels, that's a lot of stuff. And two, it's running at like the lower. I believe this is a $50 game,
Yes.
50 American dollars. So it's running at their lower price point, which I think is interesting.
I'm surprised. I mean, honestly, I thought this was going to be a $40 game. If I
Sure, yeah.
before, I mean, I looked it up before the show, and I was like, oh, $50. Okay, that's maybe $10 more than I was expecting. But I mean, it's better than $60. It just seemed, I don't know, it seemed like it would be like more of the midpoint instead of like just slightly below
I
standard
think
market.
I think the tiers are changing. I think 50 is the new 40 in video
I
game
know.
prices.
Speaking of Tears of the Kingdom was their first $70 game in many, many
Yeah.
years. So, yeah, Mario vs. Donkey Kong out February 16th. We'll talk about it more when we can, probably on the February 16th episode. We are going to take our final break of the episode. When we get back, I'm going to be doing an eShop Gem of the Week. We'll be right back. We are back, and we are going to do an eShop Gem of the Week to wrap up this episode. Charles, it's actually one that we talked about recently, and I know that you are such a diehard 2D Sonic fan that this makes sense. But no, this was honestly the reason that I wanted to do this on this episode was because of the Sonic Cross Shadow Generations announcement.
Mhm.
If people are itching for a little bit of Sonic action and they don't want to actually play a Sonic game, Freedom Planet is a great game to check out on your Nintendo Switch. It is, as I talked about when we were talking about the Freedom Planet 2 trailer that came out a couple weeks ago, it is basically an homage to the classic Sonic games, the 2D Sonic games, but in the style of the Sega CD graphics. So think like kind of the visuals that you got in Sonic CD, but in an all-new adventure. So this came to Switch in 2018, and as I talked about last episode, there is Freedom Planet 2 coming out later this year. But basically, it's 2D action platforming, very fast characters. There's 3 playable characters. They all have different abilities. So there's one character who has like a hair whip ability and can spin around in a circle, or can blast through the sky. There's another character who can punch and kick and climb walls, so kind of like the Knuckles character there. And then there's a third character who can fly short distances and call upon magic spells and can throw things at enemies. So they're kind of different archetypes, but not quite the same. Like they're not like one-to-one translations of like Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles.
Right.
but it's definitely like they're pulling so much inspiration from it. The art style is really gorgeous. There's some cool boss fights in there. I've not finished Freedom Planet, but I've played a decent chunk of it, and it's definitely a if you're a 2D Sonic fan like me, then this is one you should absolutely check out. And you said you played the beginning of this, right? Or
I have it on Wii U.
that's right.
I mostly watched my brother play it. Am I right that there's a motorcycle in this game?
There is a motorcycle on this in this game. But yeah, like the boss battles or the enemies in general. I'm just clicking through some screenshots right here to kind of refresh my memory because it has been a couple months since I've played it. They do look straight out of a Sonic game, especially in those like 90s titles and Sonic CD in particular. Like if you told me like this was like a prototype of Sonic CD, I would believe you because
Yeah.
like the environments are beautiful in that same kind of like glossy 2D aesthetic that Sega CD was so well known for. And I don't know, these these developers definitely played their fair share of Sonic. It, it it is like maybe the most one-to-one like Sonic homage title that
Mhm.
I've seen. Like there's a few franchises that definitely pull heavy inspiration from Sonic. I think of like there was a game several years back called Action Hank. Did you ever play that?
No, I'm gonna Google this.
It's Hank spelled Henk. And it was kind of like a speed run game where like you
Whoa.
control a toy and you run through
Okay.
these different levels at like full speed, and it's not exactly like Sonic, but it is like, oh, they definitely were inspired by Sonic.
Yeah.
I would argue the best Sonic inspired game, and this may be controversial, Yoshi's Island.
Whoa.
If you look at Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island, a lot of that momentum based gameplay feels like they saw some of the stuff that Sonic did and wanted to implement it into that. I'm not saying it's like a ripoff or anything like that. Obviously, Yoshi's Island is an amazing title, but there are things that like feel like maybe they played a Sonic game and they're like, oh, there's some cool stuff that we could maybe implement into a Mario or Mario adjacent, depending on your stance on Yoshi's Island title. So, I mean, Freedom Planet is definitely up there in terms of the best Sonic homages, Sonic love letters, if you will, and it's $15, so it's not a huge price point to worry about. But I do think it's one that a lot of people see the title and they don't immediately associate it with like a Sonic homage. Like I remember I thought Freedom Planet for the longest time was like just like a old school action type side scroller, and then like I looked
Mhm.
more into it and I was like, oh, it's a kind of a Sonic game. Okay, well let me buy this immediately, and I did, and I've enjoyed what I've played so far. So that is my eShop gem of the week, Charles. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode,
Of course. I love talking Donkey Kong.
and we'll talk more of that in the coming weeks. And thank you so much to everyone for listening. Do me a favor, if you haven't already, throw All Things Nintendo a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button. If you want to get any questions or comments in, you can get in touch with me at allthingsnintendo@GameInformer.com or hit me up on social media at Brian P. Shea. You can also join the Game Informer community Discord, which is a perk for subscribing to our Twitch channel, even just for 1 month. Charles, where can people find you on the internet?
Find me anywhere at ChuckDuck365.
That is our show for this week. Thank you again for listening. Take care. We will see you next time.
As Mario says, let's-a go.